طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد نعم طيب إن شاء الله. So it's the fourth session بإذن الله تعالى, and we've reached it's the halfway point of the course, though today we'll probably be reaching close to the halfway mark of the text, but again that's okay because the first part of the text and next session will still be dealing with metaphysics, which is you could say the more technical part of Aqidah, whereas as we move to prophetology and other things it becomes a little bit easier. But the next session or two will still be related to metaphysics. Last session we began the discussion on Allah's attributes, as-sifat. We broke it down and we treated it in a very kind of Ash'ari fashion, which means that we looked at al-wujud, existence, as a sifatul nafs, an essential attribute. We looked at the 5 negative attributes, or salbiya, which were al-wahdaniyya, al-qidam, al-baqa, al-mukhalif lil-hawadith, and al-qiyam al-dhat. If you remember those 5, we did those, and those 5 were essentially negating the opposite, which would disallow al-wujud. So the fact that you accept wajib al-wujud means that you accept these attributes as negating the opposite. Then we looked at 7 in the Ash'ari school, 8 in the Maturidi school, but the 8th one at Takween we left for today. So 7 attributes, which what we call the salbiya attributes, the ma'ani, the attributes which were a ma'na za'id, yani it was like superadded to the essence, this meaning, but it was necessarily understood. Out of those 7, we said that 4 of them were understood through the intellect, and 3 of them were understood through revelation. So they were al-qudra, al-ilm, al-irada, and al-qudra, and I'll do it in the proper order. Al-ilm, al-irada, and al-qudra. These 3, so knowledge, God's having knowledge. No. Sorry, it's going to come here. So al-ilm, al-irada, and al-qudra, these 3, they kind of are coupled together, and a takween in the Maturidi school, which we'll talk about today, but I didn't treat it in that way last time. So you had al-ilm, al-irada, and al-qudra, and then you had as-sam', al-basar, al-kalam, and then al-hayat. And as-sam', hearing, al-basar, seeing, al-kalam, speech, these 3 we understood from revelation, although with kalam there is some difference about that, which perhaps if we get time we'll talk about it when we talk about kalam today. But that's not really the objective of trying to break down where we know al-kalam from, more about al-kalam itself. And then hayat is just understood, because you cannot imagine all of these attributes except with al-hayat. And then with these 7, you naturally understand 7 attributes of action. Well, if God has power, he must be powerful. If he has omnipotence, he must be omnipotent. If he has will, he must be willing. If he has knowledge, he must be knowing. If he has sight, he must be seeing, etc. And so with those 7, you then affirm 7 of the ma'nawiyya attributes, which are necessarily understood by understanding the ma'ani. So 7 plus 7 was 14, plus the 5 of salbiya, 19, plus the 1 al-wujud, the sifat al-nafs. These were 20 necessary attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is wajib in the Sunni school of thought that every believer must know. With the addition of a takween in the Maturidi school, as we'll begin with inshallah ta'ala in a minute. Just to finish off the discussion of as-sifat, al-asma wa sifat. So I mentioned that these are ma'ani za'ida ala dhat. What that means is that these are meanings, and it's important to understand this word ma'na, that these are meanings that are superadded to the essence. They are not the essence, and nor are they separate from the essence. Now the reason why our scholars spoke in this language, the attributes are not the essence, nor are they separate from the essence, was because of certain positions that were happening in their time. One position, let's say, if you supposed that all of these attributes, let's say the attributes of ma'ani that we're talking about here, of course, because that's the extra ma'na. So al-qudra, power, will. If they are qadim, which they are, meaning pre-eternal, these attributes are pre-eternal. They did not begin. God did not create them or cause them. So if you say that they are qadim, but that they are not attributes of God, but that they are God, that God is power, God is will, God is knowledge, then this would assume multiplicity for God, because each one of them does not have a beginning. So because none of them have a beginning and they are all His essence, then it would allow for multiplicity in the essence of God. So our scholars didn't like that. So they said, no, we can't say that. But we can't say that it's separate from God, a bit like, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. It can cause all kinds of issues. So the idea of separate from God was a problem too. Because what do you mean by the attributes are separate from God? What does that mean? So if you were to say that the attribute is separate from God, did He create those attributes? Because if they're hadith, that means they had a beginning. If they had a beginning, they were caused by God. So how did God cause power if He had no power? How did God will without having any will? Does that make sense? If He created His power and He created His will, with what power and will was He creating and with what knowledge? So that argument is not able to stand. So for this reason, and there were people that took that position, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later bi-idhnillahi ta'ala when we speak about kalam, that there are certain positions. So you have the attributes of God. We say as Ahlul Sunnah, the Ash'aris, Maturidis, that the attributes of God are pre-eternal, they have always existed, they have no beginning, they are established in the essence of God, but not that they are His essence, nor are they separate from His essence. Khalas. That's how we understood the sifat. Now those sifat that you understood as we looked at it from the Ash'ari perspective, there was an addition of at-takween. At-takween. At-takween literally means to make something be. To make something be. To make something exist. Now, for the Ash'aris, they looked at this as irrelevant because they said God creates through His qudrah, through His power. God creates through His power. So what then is the need for takween? Now, if you remember the kind of Ash'ari treatment of al-Qudrah, they had two kinds of al-Qudrah, if you remember. They had the Qudrah, which I'm going to need something to wipe the board, so if anybody has a tissue, I'd appreciate it, because I can't find the whiteboard. So, when you look at al-Qudrah, for example, Allah's power, there's two types that we would say of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, as would be defined by the Ash'aris, in particular. They'd say that one is suluhiyya and one is tanjiziyya. Tanjiziyya and saluhiyya. So, all this means is that God's power is able to do all of these different possible things. For example, I gave this example to you 2 lessons ago when we did it. If I have 3 pens, which pen do I choose? I think it was last time we did it. 3 pens, my qudrah, my capability extends to all 3 of these. But then tanjiz, yani anjaza al-fi'l, the moment that I actually cause this, my power extends to this particular one from these different pens, that's the moment that we will say this is qudra tanjiziyya. Now the Maturidis, they differ with the Ash'aris in this slightly. How do they differ? If I have your attention. How they differ is, the Maturidis do not understand al-qudra to actually produce something. For them, al-qudra, the attribute of al-qudra is not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates particular things within the world. He doesn't produce anything by His qudra except that His qudra extends to it and He has the power over it. But the actual causing it to be is through His attribute at-takween. So this is where takween fits in. here. This is where takween fits in. For example, what's the difference then? So let's say we borrow the same terminology for now. Let's say we borrow it. Yeah.
Can you put an English translation of suluhiyya and tanjeez?
How would you translate suluhiyya? Like able or
Capability.
capable? Right. Yeah. Let's put capable. That says capable, by the way, albeit it's lost a little bit at the end. It has an end. There's laysa lahu baqa. Okay, then tanjeeziyya is like actualization.
Or manifest.
Yeah, manifestation. So I'll just put manifest, yeah. طيب. In an entire building we can't find some tissue. Sorry, oh, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. It's alright, sit down now. Jazakallah khair. I was thinking at some point it's just going to appear. And it wasn't appear, but it did. طيب. So anyway, you've got this point here, yeah? طيب. Now, for the Maturidis, they say that look, they say Allah has al-Qudra over all of these different options. صح? 3 different options, there's the Qudra. Then Allah's Qudra is particular to the one that He wills. So now, imagine you got a vending machine, right? This is my own example, so if you don't like it, you don't have to take it. But it's a good one, I think. So you have a vending machine, and I stand in front of the vending machine, and I think, right, I have the capability to buy all of these. I could pick any one that I want. But I'm going to choose, I don't know, B7. Right? So I click B7. Now, when I click it, it falls into this little barzakh. This like intermediary realm, doesn't it? Well, I still don't have it, but I've selected it. Do you get that? And this is Allah's qudra. As in, bila tashbih, of course, without any comparison. That God's qudra extends to all of these things, and then His qudra is particular to one. He's willed that one. So His qudra is particular. That thing is what's going to be. But that doesn't actualize it in the world until He makes it be. Do you get that point? And one of the reasons why the Maturidi said this is because if you look, when Allah uses the word qudra in the Quran, He does not necessarily use it to actualize things. For example, He says that He is ala kulli shay'in qadir. Allah can do anything. He could have created you in an unimaginable different kind of possibilities, couldn't He? Yet He didn't. But He is qadir over it. So despite Him being qadir over that possibility, He didn't actualize it. Yet whenever Allah says kun, be, fayakun, and it is. So for the Maturidis, they say, well, hold on, qudra doesn't necessarily mean that He is actualizing that in the world. It's His takween that He makes it be. But His qudra is that His power extends to it. That's how they understood takween. It's like on the edge of being, so the idea of ikhraj min al-adam ila al-wujud, of bringing from non-existence into existence, is the attribute takween, not qudra. Qudra only brings it to a certain place where that is waiting to be, basically, in some kind of strange metaphorical sense. And it does cause philosophical problems. This debate can go on very, very lengthy in terms of philosophy, because if you're saying He's bringing something from non-existence to existence, can you even call a thing that does not exist a thing? So, it does cause certain philosophical discussions to open up, but that's not our domain here. The point is, the Maturidis generally affirmed at-takween, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mukawwin. He makes things be. Al-mukawwan, all of this around us is mukawwan. It's been made to be by Allah's kun. And that's how they understood it. Whereas al-qudra, He's qadir over everything. Of course, He's able. He's capable to do everything. But it's His takween by which He actually manifests everything in the world. Do you get that difference? You don't get it, do you? So imagine...
Are you looking at me?
Yeah.
Alright. I thought you might be looking behind me.
No, I was looking directly at you. Are you okay?
Yeah.
You got it?
No, I was just... so I was just thinking, like, obviously... Sorry, my mind was thinking, when you make a decision, right? So you're saying that that's already been destined, right? And it's... So when you're making a choice...
We're not talking about us, we're talking about God here.
No, I know what you mean. So I was just thinking in the sense where... Because obviously it's already been willed that you will go in a certain direction, right?
Yeah.
So
So you're going to talk about the issue of are you like forced, compelled, right?
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Mine
So
was going
when we do so after this section, next lesson will be Ru'yatullah. I won't be able to fit it in today. I don't think I have to cover takween, I have to cover kalam, and I have to cover the mutashabihat verses. You know, Allah's hand, Allah's face. So that's quite a lot to cover. I don't think I'm going to get to Ru'yatullah. But literally, the next lesson is Ru'yatullah, and then Khalqu Af'al al-Ibad. Allah's creating actions. Does Allah create your actions, or do you create your actions? So if you just leave that, if you don't mind, till next lesson, then we'll look at it.
That's fine.
Yeah, no. But I did mention to you when we did irada though.
Yeah.
I said to you there's irada suluhiyya and irada tanjiziyya. I don't know if you remember this. And I said to you that sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's his irada has two kinds. What in English we call an ontological will and a deontological will. An ontological will, what we call his irada qat'iyya. What that means is that when he willed that, it be. But his irada tafwidiyya is that he wills to allow you a choice. So it's like a multi, you know what's the test called when you have
Multiple choice.
multiple choice.
But that's what I'm trying to make. So if Allah's willed you to allow a choice, do they still know what the answer is
Of
going to
course.
be, right?
Of course, yeah.
So once again, it comes back to
Yeah, I mean, people look at this as a
you know what I
door.
mean? Yeah.
People look at this as a door, but that the argument doesn't make sense because just because you know something,
Yeah.
like like God has knowledge of everything that will be. But if He just knew the choices that you were going to make, then that does not necessitate that He was forcing you to do so. When we do khalq af'al al-ibad, then I'll feel comfortable with allowing that floor to open up and to discuss that. Even though it's problematic, by the way. That's not an easy discussion. There's been massive scholars from the Sunni community, if you like, that have had tawakkuf on that. They've just not been able to fully grasp it in its core. That there's a certain point philosophically that you could argue against the position of the Sunnis. But we have a discussion of al-kasb and other things about that, so I'd rather leave it if that's okay with you, inshallah. Barakallah feekum. Or maybe after class.
Definitely.
Na'am. Takween. So this is where takween sits. It's at when Allah's qudra has, you could say, essentially selected this thing to be maqdur. It's His sifat takween that actually makes it be in creation. So we generally as Hanafis, we affirm for Allah, along with His qudra and His ilm and His irada, it should be the other way around. His ilm, His irada and His qudra. Because He knows what He wills and He wills what He is able to. Al-qudra and His sam' and His basar and His kalam and His hayat, also at takween. So we have this additional attribute. But this attribute of a takween is min ijtihad al-ulama. Min ijtihadiyat. Meaning this is not from the definitive aspects of creed. Meaning that if scholars disagreed on it, it doesn't make a difference. Because for many scholars, this was a semantic debate. Because really, what are you saying that's different? You're not denying that God is the one that's making it happen or that God's doing it. You're just denying or just differing on the words that you're using to describe God's act. Does that make sense? Call it takween, call it qudra tanjiziyya. What difference does it make? Except it can have a debate because the takween is a qadimi sifa. Whereas, ala kullin, that's a separate debate altogether. But the point is, you're saying the same thing, aren't you? Nobody here is believing that other than God is creating or has power. The words may differ. Arguably, there is a theological debate here, but it is not, it's subsidiary, if that makes sense. It's not principle, and it doesn't make any difference. So you could say this and the issue of aql, from like the 13 or 14 differences between the Maturidis and Ash'aris that exist, these two are probably the only ones that can be considered theological. Everything else after that, the kind of 10, 11, 12 other differences that we have between Maturidis and Ash'aris are basically semantic. They're just a play of words. Does that make sense? They're not really significant. This one and the issue of al-aql, which we'll do when we do causality, there you can say are theological differences, but again, they're subsidiary, they're not important. So you get the point of takween now, where it fits in, and al-qudra, or past al-qudra. So after al-qudra you have al-takween. So you would say it's al-ilm, God has knowledge, al-irada, He wills, al-qudra, He is able, and al-takween, He actualizes that qudra and that irada that He knew. Jalla fil ula. Then the second discussion is about al-kalam. Subhanallah. Let me No. Or do you want me to do the mutashabihat first? No, I think we should do kalam. Let's do al-kalam, inshallah ta'ala.
Sort of link, no?
Sorry?
In the sense that can does kalam have a voice? And
Na'am.
stuff
So
like
basically, yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His attribute kalam. Huwa yatakallam. Allah speaks. Now, obviously, when we say speak, like He did for many before us, they could not understand speech except through how we speak. So there were essentially 4 schools, 4 different groups in how they understood kalam. So I'm going to use the board if that's okay. Now this is going to draw on everything that we learned in the first 2 lessons of Jawhar and Jism. So you're going to have to try and bring all of that mustahdar fi dhihn as much as possible. If not, we'll kind of revise it a little bit as we're going through. So the first school of, so I'm going to write in English, I'll write it in English. So the first school is that they say, I'm going to put H for huruf, letters, and I'll put, let me write it in English. So letters, L, and S for sounds. So letters and sounds. So the first group, so out of these the 4, 3 of them say that God's speech has letters and sound. But they differ on something afterwards. The first school, which were Ba'dul Hanabila, some of the Hanbalis, not the majority, despite what some people think. No, some Ba'd al-Hanabila, and they were a ta'ifa, just qalila or qasira. It was not or saghira rather. They were not a major movement in the Hanbali school, but some of the Hanbalis. So you know we have 4 schools of law: Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. From the Hanbalis, which is the smallest, there was a small fraction that held the opinion that God's speech was letters and sounds, which was qadim, pre-eternal. And it was established in His essence. Meaning, just like all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's other attributes, which are pre-eternal and established with God's being, right? They're not His ayn, and they're not His being, and nor they separate. They understood this, but they said it has letters and sounds. Now this is a problem. Because what's the definition of qadim? What was the definition of qadim?
has no beginning.
Yeah, has no beginning. Qadim is pre-eternal. It has no beginning. Non-existence did not precede it. Now, if you look at a letter and a sound, what is it? It's made up of accidents. My voice is different to your voice. Maybe louder, maybe less loud. Letters. Some letters are, their shape is Hamza. Some shape is Ba. Some Ta. They're all different in their shapes, in their sizes. And what is that? Being different in your shapes and sizes and sounds. These are all accidents, aren't they? If you remember what accidents were. They're all accidents that are changing. What is an accident? Either you have, hear me out, as in when you say the kayfiyah of something, the how of something, either you're looking at the tartib al-jawahir or al-a'rad in this case, like the structure, or you're looking at the number. This has more than this and this has less. This is what you're discussing. So for you to say that something is both pre-eternal with no beginning, yet it has an accident or has accidents, is a contradiction. Why? Because an accident is something necessarily that has a beginning. Because it's changing. Right? So anything, let's say I got a makan, a place here, has the accident red, has the accident round, the weight, the size, all of these are accidents, right? Now anything, pay attention to this, anything which is not free of accidents must either take that accident or its opposite. It cannot be free of those accidents. So for example, the minimum accidents were what? Either, take for example, motion or stillness, right? So if this pen, takes an accident of motion, then it cannot be free either of motion or stillness. There's no third option. So anything which must take an accident and cannot exist without the accident. You cannot conceive of that thing except with its accident. And the accident has a beginning. Therefore that thing must have a beginning. That's very important. Look, this pen cannot exist without its accidents. If you take the color away, the shape away, the size away, the weight away, there's no pen left. So you cannot conceive of the thing without its accidents. Once you say that this thing takes an accident, then you have to accept that either it takes that accident or its opposite, it must have one. And if it takes an accident, it can't be free of it. If it can't be free of it, then the accident, when it began, it must have begun, because you conceive of it before the accident. Could you conceive of this pen before all of its accidents? No. So once you say that something has an accident, and the accident is temporal, then that thing must be temporal. Do you get that point?
So, in a sense, just to simplify to understand it, is so a human has a tongue which moves, makes sounds, and so forth. So it's agreed that it's temporal and it's created. So therefore, anything that's like that for the creation, you can't put that on the creator.
Yeah, I mean that's when we're talking about the kalam and the argument for Ahl Sunnah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm just trying to build a little case for it here because of what these schools would say.
Yeah.
So what I'm arguing is that, for example, because I'll tell you the truth of the matter is, it's very easy to say now or it was very easy once upon a time for us to say to somebody, God's speech is not like our speech. It's different. But that's wrong. Because that's what the Salafis say. And when we do those attributes today, we'll talk about that. Because they'll say, no, God has a hand, but not like our hand. So we say that, what do you mean? Either you deny that God in reality does not have a hand like our hand, khalas, we're saying the same thing. But if what you mean is actually he does have a hand, or he does have speech, but we don't know how. See, that's a problematic debate because we don't even use the word how for God.
Is that different because that's metaphorical, that one seems
that's a whole,
the other one?
Yeah, I think
this whole thing about the tongue.
So this is not about the tongue. I'm arguing something very, very subtle here. Yeah. I'm saying, if you say that God has an attribute which is pre-eternal, yet has letters and sounds, that is a contradiction. Because something pre-eternal has no beginning, but letters and sound have a beginning. If you say that it has letters and sounds, that must mean that it has a beginning, but you're saying that it doesn't have a beginning. So does it have a beginning or doesn't it have a beginning? Because it can't be both. That's what I'm saying. So do you see that point?
So the hadith that says that Allah calls out.
Yeah, we're going to do all of that. That's so if you don't mind, please. Yeah, because that's all. After we've done kalam, so I'm trying to treat this one issue. Now when we do the mutashabihat, وهو القاهر فوق عبادي استواء على العرش عين وجه ساق, all of that's going to come. بإذن الله تعالى. This is the issue right now of kalam. My whole point, sorry, just one second. My whole point, hear the argument once again. I'm saying the same way you cannot envisage this pen without its accidents. You say, well, the pen cannot precede the accidents. Therefore, if the accidents had a beginning, the pen must have had a beginning. I'm saying, but if I was to say to you, no, the pen is pre-eternal, but the accidents are temporal. You'd say, but how is that possible? Because you can't envisage the pen. So either the pen is pre-eternal, and we can accept that, but then you can't say that it has accidents, because accidents are temporal. You can't have a square circle. You can't say to me that the square, I mean, that's a bad example, but you cannot say that the pen exists without its accidents. If you're going to affirm accidents which are temporal, then you must accept that the pen is temporal. So what we're saying is you cannot say that Allah's speech is both pre-eternal and has letters and sounds. Because letters and sounds by definition have size, shape, accidents, which all indicate towards temporalness. هذا هو. That's all it's saying. That's the first madhab. That's the first school. The second school, they realized the mistake. So they call it Karamiyah. So the second school, the Karamiyah, they say Allah's speech has letters, it has sounds, but it is hadith, which means temporal. But it is established in His essence. So they realized that you can't say that the attribute is qadim but has temporal accidents, because that doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction, right? So they said, well, it can only, but it must have letters and sounds which are temporal. Therefore, the attribute must be temporal. But it's God's attribute, so it's established in His essence. Mushkila. What's the problem here?
Allah becomes temporal.
Allah becomes temporal. The same reason why, if this pen is the place for these accidents, and the accidents are temporal, therefore the pen becomes temporal. If you just now move that one step further and say that the attribute in itself is temporal, but it's established, the place is God. So that means that God has something temporal in His being. So anything which constitutes of temporal things is itself temporal. It's just a problem for them. So the Karamiya were rejected very, very... No.
Why was everybody so adamant that they had
Sorry?
why was everybody so adamant that they had to be letters and sounds? Is that because the Quran?
Yeah, there's a reason for that. Yeah. So when we get to the fourth madhab, then I'll explain that. Yeah. So if you don't mind, please, Jazakallah khair. Sorry, did you have something to say?
No, you answered.
Okay.
So you answered very well.
Alhamdulillah. So does everybody get the second madhab?
So can you use a black pen?
It says whiteboard marker. Okay, I will use it. I looked at it and I got scared. I thought it's been in some kind of war. Look at mashallah. All right, look at that. ماذا أفعل بهذا؟ لا إله إلا الله. Okay, yeah, أخي. It's my fault. I forgot my pens. Okay. طيب. So the third mazhab was the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, who arguably are building up on this argument. And they said, okay, look, it has to be letters and sounds. By the way, look, a simple answer is they were doing what we call, they were taking a dalil min al-shahid al-ghaib. They were saying that, look, the only way we know God's kalam is by letters and sounds. Meaning we don't know kalam in any other way. Arguably, again, there was a semantic debate here. Some have argued that it was there was no need to have this argument. That they essentially could have solved the problem very, very easily, because one of them was just speaking about what you see in creation, whereas another group was identifying an attribute for God. But the problem with the Mu'tazila were, if you remember, is they have a big problem with those attributes for God. So hang on, let me get to that one, yeah? Let me get to that one. So they said letters, sounds, but it's qadim, na'am, but it's not established with God, but with other than God. Afwan, not qadim, hadith. Afwan. Letters and sounds which are hadith, the Mu'tazila said, that they are temporal, hadith, but not that God, they're established with God. So they built on the previous argument. Because if you say that the mahal, if somebody was to say that ma'adallah, is God, then it falls into the conundrum that you highlighted. So what they said is, no, the attribute is temporal, because obviously it's made up of letters and sounds, and they have structure, order, A comes before B, etc., order, structure, etc. But it's that it's established with something other than God. So if I said to somebody now, for example, can you go and open the door? Who's the goer? Who's the goer? He's going. I'm not the goer. So how can you say that God has an attribute that He doesn't have? You see the problem? If He's establishing this attribute in Him, not in Himself, because it's temporal, firstly, He's producing His own attributes, which causes other problems. Yeah. Secondly, He's the one with the attributes, the mawsuf, not me. So mas'ala, idhab, go open the door. Who's the dhahib? Who's the goer? He is, not me. So in this way, you deny the attribute. You deny kalam for Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kallama Allah Musa taklima. Allah spoke to Moses. So Allah says that He is a mutakallim, that He speaks. But how can you call Him mutakallim if He's creating the kalam in somebody else? That person is mutakallim, not Him. For Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Allah, there are no letters and no sounds. No. No letters, no sounds, but it is a ma'na, a meaning. A ma'na, a meaning which is qadim, pre-eternal, and established in his essence, Jalla fil Ula. Okay? What does this mean? The way the Ahl Sunnah understood al-Kalam is they broke it down into two. Are you okay?
Yeah,
They broke this kalam down into two kinds. You had kalam nafsi and kalam lafzi. Kalam nafzi, they said, is pre-eternal. Lafzi is hadith. Nafsi is speech which is within God. Like, for example, if I was to say to you, because some people, the argument really came from some people thinking that speech can only be in word, since that's the only way we know it. Which to some degree, fine, that's correct. But what they fail to consider is that if I was to say to you right now, Yalla, idhab, what does that mean? Go in Arabic. If I said to you, idhab, it means go. If I said go, what does that mean? Go. If I said to you, jai, what does that mean?
Go.
If I said get it's Turkish for go. Yeah. Yeah, they actually say dafo get. It sounds very much like our, yeah. And when they're angry with you, they'll say dafo get. And I was like, oh wow, because it comes from the word daf'an in Arabic. So even when we say in Urdu and Punjabi, etc., it comes from the same. Now, if I said to him, jai, get, go, idhab, it means the same thing. It means the same thing. The meaning is the same. The words are changing. The words are changing. So when we're thinking about Allah's kalam as Ahl Sunnah, it is a meaning which is a pre-eternal attribute with God, which He as we can see, He creates, or He manifests rather, that meaning in letters and words within the world. For example, am I not God's murad? God willed me, right?
Yeah.
So I am the will of God.
Yeah.
I am maqdur. I am murad. I am ma'loom. I am known by God. So the manifestation of God's irada, qudra, ilm is this world. Whether it's a human being or a tree or the entire universe. Sah? The manifestation of God's words is na'am. You can find it in a mushaf. Not that this is a mushaf. You can find it in the mushaf. You can find it in the Torah. If it was in, Abrani. Or in Syriac. If it was the original Bible. The language, letters and sounds are irrelevant. They're just manifestations for us to understand. His kalam is His pre-eternal attribute. The same way He has this ta'alluq, this moment where it manifests in the world, the same way with kalam. You get that point? So, it's haram and kufr, in fact, for somebody to say that in Bismillah, in Allah's kalam nafsi, that the sin comes after the ba. Haram and kufr. Because Allah's speech does not have sequence. But it's Allah's ma'na. It's a ma'na za'id with Allah's essence. But when He put it into language for us to understand, khalas, when the ba comes before sin, this is all hadith. So the kalam lafzi, Allah's speech, which is like a transcript almost, which is here, this is hadith, it's printed, of course, it's got letters, shapes, sounds, no problem. But His actual attribute, this is qadim. Again, now the problem for the Mu'tazila was, they denied the attributes. If you remember, they said that Allah is power, not that He has power. Allah is will, not that He has will. So for them to say Allah is speech, there was a problem. So as far as they were concerned, they would say Kalamullah. Kalamullah is this because they understood kalam to be structure, order, letters, sounds, and they could not put that to Allah's essence. Had they had the understanding of Ahl Sunnah, of how you understand attributes, they wouldn't have had that problem. So arguably, when they were saying Allah's speech is created, they weren't saying an attribute of God. They denied the attributes to begin with. Do you get that point? They were talking about this. Khalas, no problem. Yeah, we agree with you on that one, no problem. Of course it is. When I say it, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, taba'an, this is makhluq, hadith. created, has a beginning, has an order, has accidents of sound and letters and so this was now you may say, well, that sounds quite straightforward, it's not so tricky. Why was it such a big issue? Arguably it was hijacked politically. And if you look in many of our creeds, sometimes the creed wasn't as big as it was made or used to be, because it was used for politicking or for political leverage. The particular issue of kalam was an excellent way for the Abbasid Caliphs to suppress traditionalist ulama. They used it. So it was one of their ways that they used it. And you can see that happening all over. When people are within a particular sect, they will, the particular issue that they're differing on becomes in hyperbole because of the context that they're in. Not that if you took that same mas'ala out of that context into a different context and asked Muslim scholars, they just kind of look at it and say, what are you guys arguing about? It's not such a big issue. So some scholars have argued that kalam was in this way. Now, that's really it in terms of... Now, so the argument about kalam, and then one other istidlal that the scholars made was the Umayyad period saw a lot of poetry. As in Muawiyah radiallahu anhu himself, you could say the first of the Umayyad kings, he used to sit in the masjid and he would have poets recite poetry. So it was a period, if you know, of great poets and poetry. Now, Arabic language, and be mindful of this, where did we get Arabic language from? We didn't make it up. Arabic language was taken from the Jahili poets before the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his time, and within the Umayyad period. After that, there was fasad fil kalam. It began to change. That was, you could say, the height of Arabic. So often the rules that we take, those that go further in grammar, they'll say, oh, the Basri scholars of grammar say this, the Kufi grammar, the Banu Tamim say this. They'll have their differences. Such and such scholar says that. They have differences on language, on grammar itself. So that period is where we took grammar. So we looked to those poets on how they understood words. And one of the poets, the Banu Umayy, he was a Christian, Akhtar, I think his name was, if I remember correctly, he would say, إن الكلام لفي الفؤاد إنما جعل اللسان على الفؤاد دليلا. He would say that يعني إن الكلام, speech, في الفؤاد, لفي الفؤاد, it's within the heart. إنما جعل اللسان, the tongue was only there على الفؤاد دليلا, to indicate or to show you what was in the chest, which is true. Because I may say to you sometimes that, look, I've got something to say to you, but I haven't said it. But I still have something to say. Where is it? It's inside, isn't it? So I still have kalam. We still call it kalam. So this idea that you cannot call it kalam unless it's letters and sounds goes against the basic understanding A of Arabic language. Secondly, use your common sense. We do it all the time. For example, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu wardah, when the Prophet ﷺ passes away, of course, the Khilafah is a big issue now. They know that if it's not from someone from Quraysh, either the Bradari or the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, it's going to be big issues. They won't accept the people of Ansar, the Arabs, because the Quraysh had a high place amongst the Arabs. So Sayyidina Umar goes straight to Sayyidina Bakr and he said, convinces him. The Ansar are having a meeting, we need to go, it needs to be from Quraysh because the Ummah will split. So as he's walking in the hadith, he says, I had a maqala, meaning I had some kalam, some speech within me that I thought, as soon as I get there, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to give them a speech to convince them to give bay'ah to Abu Bakr. And he goes, but as soon as I got there, typical of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when it came to Sayyidina Umar, sabaq. He preceded him, he always did. Anything Sayyidina Umar wanted to do, charity, good, before he got there, Sayyidina Abu Bakr is there. Umar brings half his wealth for the Prophet ﷺ to take the battle, Abu Bakr brings all of his wealth. Abu Bakr brings charity when they're in the valley of Abu Talib being boycotted in Mecca, and he goes, I get there thinking I'm going to give them charity. Who turns up before me? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. It was just the way it was. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq beat him to everything. Radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. So he says, straight away, Sayyidina Abu Bakr stood up and he started to tell. And he said, my speech, and he added to it, meaning he said it better. And he goes, so when he finished, then I stood up and I said, you've heard what you need to hear. The people won't accept it. So extend your hand, O Abu Bakr, so that we can give. I think he used his punya, so that we can take bay'ah with you. And then Abu Bakr extended his hand and said, Umar took bay'ah, and the Sahaba took bay'ah at that point. The point is, he never mentioned. We only have in the hadith that he had something to say, and he passed away with it, radiyallahu anhu, without telling anybody. So now his kalam is still called kalam, despite it being out. So through the nature of Arabic language, kalam is used in the Quran is in Arabic. So there's no problems with saying that Allah is kalam, which is in His self. There's no problem with that. So we say Allah's kalam is a sifa, qadima, qa'ima, bidhat. It's a pre-eternal attribute that is established with His being, Jalla fil ula. So that's the issue of kalam basically. In a summary, Bismillah.
You know, when you said that Mu'tazila, that they deny the sifat, is that because it was part of the zat, or they totally deny the sifat?
Sorry? They deny the dhat?
The attributes.
Yeah,
You said they kind of said no.
Yeah.
Was that because it was part of the essence, or because they totally?
Yeah, because they believe that was God's essence.
It was so the attributes were part of.
Yeah, but they're not attributes. They are Him.
Yeah, so they were part of the essence.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing is, you said politically, so the whole issue about the Quran being created. So can you just shed light on that so we can understand how that they materialized and what that meant to them? Or briefly.
It's 8:20, and the larger section of it we have left. But okay, look, I'm not an expert on the history at that period, except that the Mu'tazila had infiltrated into the house of al-Ma'mun essentially, and into the kind of the Abbasid Khalids. And they were lovers of art. I mean, the Abbasids gave us wonderful things. I mean, they gave us a lot of negative things. They were people of fahsha. They were people of illicit behavior. They were not nice people necessarily. إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبُّ مِنْهُمْ. But they were lovers of arts. In fact, that's what was their downfall. Because they were so involved with knowledge and poetry and learning that bits of the empire started falling apart. I mean the entire, مَا وَرَاءُ النَّهَرِ,
Transoxania.
Naam. Al-Maturidi, this where Imam Maturidi is from, Samarkand, Uzbekistan, it was part of the, basically, it broke away because they thought if we don't send them tax, can they do anything about it? No. Carry on. Partly the reason. So they were intellectual. So they set up Darul Hikam, this institute to begin translating all of these Greek works of mathematics, of logic, of philosophy. And naturally, they began to be, influenced. And so once the Mu'tazila took hold of the political arena, they were able then to produce what they call the Mihna, which was an inquisition where they were forcing the traditionalist scholars to basically accept them. So look, what better, see, the ulama are a problem for you. Why has Ahlul Bayt always struggled historically? Why have people always killed Ahlul Bayt? Have you noticed that? If you don't know that, then you don't know history. Because if you look at Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet, from the time of Imam Ali himself, alayhi salam, people have been at war with him and with that family. Because they're a problem. People love Ahlul Bayt. People love them. The family of the Prophet. SubhanAllah, the Prophet said, they're not going to leave the Quran until the Day of Judgment. They come to me on the Hawd like this. So the Ahlul Bayt so people were jealous. And people didn't like the power that they had. And there's always a power struggle. The ulama have that. Because people love the ulama. They get with the ulama. The ulama always have people. Generally. People. So they don't like them. They're a threat. So one of the ways, the best way, that you can silence people is using religion. That's the best way. I mean, Kalamullah was an issue. The Mu'tazila had bigger issues with Ahl Sunnah. I mean, they had bigger issues than Ahl Sunnah. But they used this. They used to write it on the walls of the door tops of the mosques. They tortured people like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They silenced people like Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Imam Bukhari's teacher. There was a great tribulation for that. Arguably, what did the Sultan care about this? but it was a way that they used it in order to silence.
He was a Mu'tazila.
Yeah, of course.
Ma'mun and Mu'tasim and Wathib.
But arguably, did he care about Kalamullah, Makhluk that much?
But he used to get them to debate and stuff in front.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, because he loved it. They loved. Khalas, if that's okay, I'm just gonna numshi with that a little bit, right? Now, so we looked at at-takween today, which is specific to the Maturidis, the attribute of at-takween, of making be. We've looked a little bit at al-Kalam, Allah's attribute of speech, a little bit. The last thing about which he mentioned in the text. So once I explain this, we'll read back through that bit of the text again, and that should all make sense. There's a middle section there where he says, ليس بعرض ولا جسم ولا جوهر ولا مصور ولا محدود ولا معدود ولا متبغض ولا متجز ولا متركب ولا متناهي. لا 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 لا. He is not an atom, he is not an accident, he is not a body, he is not limited, he is not divisible, he is not. All of this was under al-Mukhalif lil-Hawadith. Remember when I explained those 5 Salbiya attributes to you? Yeah? What were they? Al-Wahdaniyya, Al-Qidm, Al-Baqa, Al-Mukhalif lil-Hawadith, and Al-Qiyam bil-Dhat. So, the Mukhalif lil-Hawadith is one nice tidy way of saying all of that. And like I mentioned to you, the later Ash'ari works especially were far more able to articulate in a better way than some of the early Maturidi works. So he says, La, Allah is not like all of these things. A quick reminder. Allah is not an atom. Why? Atomos from Latin means that he's not divisible. Divisible from what? A body. An atom by definition is something which came from a body that you were able to divide until you got to that point that you were no longer able to divide it. So an atom comes from a body. That's the first thing. It was divisible up until this point. It came from something. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can't be a jawhar. Akid. Bil awla, moreover, he can't be an accident. Because an accident, as we know, is something that has a beginning. So he's not an arad, he's not a jawhar. He can definitely not be a jism then, because a jism is a compound of atoms, right? Which have inherent within them accidents. So he's not a jism. Understand what a jism is. A jism, so when we looked at an atom, what did we say were the 2 necessary attributes of an atom? Mutahayyiz, occupies space, and qabil al-a'rad. It takes accidents. It has to take an accident. You can't have a thing without a color or a shape or a size or some kind of weight. You can't imagine it. So when you have a body, obviously you can't have a jawhar on its own, it's going to come in a body. If you have a body, only when it occupies space can you give it a limit. So therefore you know that anything that has a limit must be a body, because bodies occupy space. It's an accident, right? Only a body is something that can have a jiha. It can have a side. It can have an angle, right? I can only say, for example, that this pen is above this table because it is relative to another body. It's true, isn't it? If something was bodiless, it has no side. It has no upness or downness or sideness. It has none of that. Do you get that point? So a body has all of these sorts of things. That's a muqaddimah. That's an important introduction for you to keep in your mind at what a jism is. That it's something that takes all of these things. Now, the last attributes are attributes which we call, so we did sifatul wujud, we did sifat al-salbiyya, sifat al-ma'ani, sifat al-ma'nawiyya. Now, we have sifat which are considered by Ahl al-Sunnah, al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya, to be from the mutashabihat. Allah mentions in the Quran, some verses in this Quran are what? Muhkamat, and some are mutashabihat. Muhkamat are those verses that are unambiguous, have no unclarity within them, they are absolutely clear, and more importantly, they have no alternative meanings. Let me give you an example of such a verse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Okay, before I give you the verse, let me just explain the muqaddimah. So this is a muqaddimah thaniya, a second muqaddimah. The first one was a reminder about what a jism is. The second muqaddimah is understanding that Allah's verses, sometimes He mentions things that we do not know the meaning of it. Like what? Can you give me an example at the top of your head about a verse in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whoever gave me that tissue, can I get another one please if that's okay? I don't have. Yeah? No, it's okay, they've got some. Inshallah, I hope.
Alif Lam Mim.
Jazakallah. Alif Lam Mim. Jazakallah. Good. What does Alif Lam Mim mean? So, you're laughing at me. You're laughing at me. Is that because I'm rubbing the tissues? No. Jazakallah. God bless you. So, what does Alif Lam Mim mean? Who knows? Except for some esoteric.
Allah and His Messenger knows.
According to some of the ulama. Yes. According to some of the ulama, only Allah knows. According to some of the ulama, Allah and His Rasul know. According to some of them, Allah and we don't know. Some people say through esoteric and kashf, until we get there, or maybe you've got there, but until I get there, I will never know. Until then, Allah knows best. Okay? So Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, the great Hanbali Imam, the giant, in his Rawdatul Nadira, it's a classic work of Usul al-Fiqh, which he summarized from Imam al-Ghazali's al-Mustafa. He mentions that people say, why would Allah reveal a verse in which you don't know the meaning? And he said, what about Alif Lam Mim? What are you going to do with that? Of course Allah does. He says it Himself. Some verses are muhkamat, unambiguous. Some are mutashabihat. They have ambiguity within them. So, Al-an, Allah mentions a whole series of verses that we would consider to be ambiguous in nature, or at least have alternative meanings. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. He is al-Qahir. How would you translate al-Qahir?
Overpowering.
Or the enforcer. Something like that, right? فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, above His slaves. فَوْق. He used the word what? Above. فَوْق. Likewise, he uses the words Yadullah fawqa aydihim. Allah's hand is above their hands. Fawqa aydihim. In one verse he mentions fawq and he mentions yad. Yad, which means what? Hand. Likewise he says Wajhullah, the face of God. Likewise he says Istiwa ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istiwa. The Lord of Mercy rose over the throne, or let's not worry about the translation, istiwa, which literally means to come over something. Right? Then, and you got other verses, and also like in the hadith, you have that Allah has nuzul, yanzil. He comes down at the time of tahajjud at night, and He calls out to His slaves, is there anyone that wants forgiveness, etc. So Allah comes down. Now you have all of these, what we would call problematics in Quranic hermeneutics. This is a problem. Because what do you do with these verses? Now, I want you to understand something about this verse. Actually, let's get to the verse in a minute. From these verses, there's a principle that we took. And all of us agree on. Whether you are Ash'ari, Maturidi, Hanbali, Salafi, Shia, you all agree on one principle. Lillahi yad, la ka'idina. Yeah? So we'll say, Lahu ay lillah, for Allah, Lahu yad is a hand, La ka'aydina. La. For Him, Lahu, for God, yad is a hand. That's the key word. La, not ka, like aydina, our hands. So, we all agree on that. No problem, that sounds great, right? Of course, Allah's hand, we don't say Allah has a hand like our hand. Now the discussion has to be, what do you mean by that? What do you mean His hand is not like our hand? Because there's two ways that you can say it. Do you mean, the kahir, that it is not like our hand in reality, haqiqah, in reality, or do you mean it is not like our hand in kayfiyah? Kayfiyah, which you could translate as modality or howness. How is Allah's hand? How? Now let me first explain the madhab So this is a big issue in our day. It was an issue classically, by the way. This was a discussion 1,000 years ago. This is not a new discussion. But it is a discussion that is, it's alive today. It's alive. And that's fine. People can have their opinion, discussion, no problem. لا نكفر أهل القبلة. This is not a matter where people should start making takfir. Albeit it is dangerous. It is dangerous. Why? Because the madhab, let's say, of the Salafi da'wah today, and you just have to read their books. This is not something hidden or not something making up. I'm not involved in polemics at all. This is not polemical. This is purely academic. What they say is, Allah's hand is not like our hand in kayfiyah, but He does have a haqiqi hand. Why? Because they say, why would Allah have a ma'na, give you a meaning that you could never know? Oh, sorry. Why would Allah mention an attribute that has no meaning? The way they would understand it. So it must have a haqiqah. Now when you say it must have a haqiqah, what does that mean? If you say that it has a reality, what is the reality of a hand? So this took us into a second debate, which was, if you were to say, for example, Yadullah, the verse in the Quran, Yadullah. Now what they would say that this of course has a ma'na haqiqi. The ma'na haqiqi is the opposite to the majaz, which is what? Metaphorical meaning, right? So let's say there's a majaz, which is power, right? Well, if I said to you, lend me a hand, yeah.
English.
Afwan. Ma'na here meaning like
Literal.
yeah, literal. Majaz meaning metaphor. Forgive the English. Thank you. Put it out. Okay, so now, if you're going to say, no, it has a reality, therefore it's the ma'na, the literal, what we call in usul al-zahir. So they say it has the zahir meaning, not the metaphoric meaning. You are not allowed to take the metaphoric meaning. You must take the literal meaning. That's the argument. So now this becomes a little bit of a problem. If I was standing here, and there was a ma'adallah. So if you had Zayd, and he had a statue of Zayd. So you got Zayd, and you got a statue of Zayd. Now if I said to you, this statue is not like Zayd, what do I mean? Do I mean he's not like Zayd in reality? Or do I mean he's not like Zayd in how Zayd is, meaning in his attributes, in his sifat? Which one do I mean? Sorry? In how he is? No, but it looks exactly like him. It's like, Madden Two Swords. May Allah protect us. Yeah? You may as well be standing to the real guy, right? So in the how, that is just like him. But the reality is one's, what would that be? Clay? Wax. And the other one is a human being. Right? So you would say that they are different in their haqiqah. Aren't they? The statue is a rock, he is a human. The reality is different. Even though the how may be the same. They look exactly the same. Right? Do you get that point? Likewise, somebody could say, I am like Abu Hanifa in knowledge. Subhanallah. يقولون هم رجال ونحن رجال. They were men and we are men. We would say, in terms of haqiqah, you are the same as Abu Hanifa in knowledge. Because the essence of knowledge and your knowledge, same essence. But not in the how. The kayfiyah is totally different of his knowledge and your knowledge. Right? You see how from both sides, the car can work. How are you not like him? For the Salafis, they say that Allah is not like, so Allah's hand is not like our hand in kayfiyah, not in haqiqah. But it is a hand. We just don't know how. That's the bench. That's the kind of argument. That's the natija, the result of it. So that became a problem for us for a number of reasons, which I'll answer. I'm just doing bayan of their school currently. The first thing that you have, do you understand this? The whole discussion. Yeah.
Why are they so adamant that it has to be taken on the zahir?
This is something that Ahlul Sunnah have struggled with because they don't do it in every verse. They don't do it. Like for example, they do it in وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِي, right? They do it there, that he's above. Yet when it comes to the verse of هُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, he is with you wherever you are, they say بِعِلْمِهِ, don't they?
But that's because there's aqwal from Salaf.
No, even that. Aqwal from Salaf is regardless. The point is it jaiz or not jaiz? Is it jaiz? And there's no aqwal from Salaf. For Imam Malik, there's a qawl. There are 3 aqwal.
I think there is, he does say.
Na'am.
بعلمه or something.
Na'am. We accept that.
Yeah.
I'm not fighting with that.
No,
we say that
yeah,
in his knowledge, yes.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, he just made a ta'wil.
Yeah, of course.
So he allowed a ta'wil. Do you get it? If they say he is with you, not like with you, like pantheism, but in his knowledge, that's what we believe. Of course, we don't believe he's with you. He's with you in his knowledge. But why is it there you can make the ta'wil and not here?
So that was that like posed to them say why the inconsistency?
Of course. And there's a play on words here. There's a play on words where when you use the word zahir, they say no, we accept the zahir but we negate the kayfiyah. This is the discussion. Whereas we say there's no kayfiyah for Allah to begin with. Because kayfiyah is what? How tall you are, how big you are, the weight you are, the color you are. These are all accidents. Allah doesn't have any of them. We don't even use the word kayf for Allah. There is no kayf for Allah. Ta'al. Jalla fil ula. He's beyond any kayfiyah. Kayfiyah is for you and me. So we deny kayfiyah to begin with. As for haqiqah, we say, look, there's a verse in the Quran and others like it where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for example, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. This verse, by ijma' of the ummah, has no alternative possible meanings. There is nothing whatsoever like him. لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. There is nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is anakullakum. This is muhkam. Muhkam. Meaning that there's no other possible meanings. As for Allah's having a hand, a face, Allah's saq, Allah's being His fawqiyah, His aboveness, His being ala al-arsh, on the throne. All of these things, they have a zahir meaning, an apparent meaning, but they also have a khafi, or a majaz, a metaphoric meaning. Because, look in language. If I say to you, for example, lend me a hand, does that mean that I'm asking you necessarily to give me a hand? It could mean that I'm saying, lend me a hand, give me a lift. Do you see what I'm trying to say? That's true, isn't it? You do that, don't you? In the Quran, look at this. The verse, this is a shocking one. In the Quran, the verse is what? وَهُوَ al-Kaheel فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. Look at the words that's used. Kahir and fawqa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Pharaoh and his army, Inna fawqahum laqahirun. Inna fawqahum. Look at the words. Inna fawqahum laqahirun. That they were, Pharaoh and his army, they were fawqahum, over the children of Israel, qahirun. No, forcing them, ruling over them, governing them. So here was Pharaoh and his army physically on top of the Bani Israel. Really, ask yourself that question. In the Quran, you know the story. Or was it that it was Pharaoh and his armies rule over them? Which one was it? Rule. The same words of fawqa and of being qahir. Here, we all interpret fawqa to not mean physically, yet when it comes to Allah, they could actually be above them. Because that's a jism and this is a jism. And a jism has fawqiyah. Yet Allah, which is not jism, has no place, has no space, has nothing of the sort. You're forcing yourself to accept it as fawqa. Yet you don't do it in, you think one verse, Habibi. I can give you a litany of verses. Subhanallah ta'ala. هُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَهٌ. Huwa, He is, الَّذِي, the one, فِي السَّمَاء, in the sky, ilah. وَفِي الْأَرْضِ ilah. And in the earth, ilah. So if you're going to say Allah is in the sky, you must now say that He is in earth as well. It's a verse in the Quran. What do you do with it? But there, no. There's an interpretation. وَهُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ. No, it's the same thing. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبْ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبْ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. We are closer to Him than His jugular vein. Why do we interpret that? Why does the entire ummah interpret that? Yet when it came to fawqa, when it came to ala, when it came to what? These specific attributes. Why the only thing that one could think of is inad. That because certain scholars mentioned it, and you are part of a certain group, that you must continue that movement. As opposed to, you disagree with that?
I don't know.
I mean, wallahu alam. But I'm saying that, what's the reason? Why interpret one? You say qarina.
Yeah, that's
So
what they
people will say qarina. Look at this one, yeah?
So are you saying that
Look.
we're saying they're doing mutashabiha and they're accusing us of doing tawil, so they themselves do tawil in certain places, so
No.
how can they accuse us of doing tawil?
No. So for example, exactly, and not just that, but وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, apart from a qawl of a salaf, by the way, which is not for aqidah. Where's the qarina? Where's the tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran?
Wallahu bima ta'amaluna basir.
Na'am.
Literally the next part.
Of course, but what I'm saying, na'am. But what about all of these, the qara'in for this one? What about whenever Allah mentions istiwa al-arsh, He mentions hukm? Isn't that the case? Whenever Allah mentions Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istiwa, whenever Allah mentions that He is over the throne, He mentions it in context of His being hakim.
Yeah. Well, creation.
When He mentions folk, He mentions qahr. So our scholars say, why do they not interpret وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرْ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ بِقَهْرِهِ? If you're going to say وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ بِعِلْمِهِ, He is وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ بِعِلْمِهِ, He is with you wherever you are in His knowledge. Why don't you say He is above you in His qahr? If you could do it for His knowledge, why can't you do it for His qahr?
So is the problem with them their hermeneutics and not?
Absolutely.
So that the belief isn't, you don't have a problem with their belief as such. You just have a problem with the way they approach the text. Is that what you're saying?
No, we do have a problem with their belief.
Okay, so let's go there.
Yeah, so you want to go there? Okay. So now the idea is now this word fawq, we have to accept in language that it has different ihtimalat, meaning it has different plausible meanings. One is the zahir meaning, the apparent, which means above physically, and one is above in rutba, in standard, in whatever, in wisdom. It could be in anything, right? The argument then is, here's a principle that they accept and we accept. When you have a verse in the Quran which is definitive and it is muhkam, like laysa kamithlihi shay, anything which contradicts it, you have to interpret it in line of that verse of the Quran.
Yes.
Because that verse of the Quran epistemically is stronger.
Yes.
Why? Because not only is the text unequivocal because it's from the Quran, but also the meaning is unequivocal because nobody disagrees on what it means. Whereas this verse is seemingly contradicting that verse. If you were to take it literally, it's a zahir meaning that Allah is above in reality, and we are above in reality. Therefore, you're gonna, what do you do about laysa kamithlihi shay? There's nothing whatsoever like Him.
So,
Let me just finish that. Go on, go for it, Bismillah.
now I was going to say, so what you're saying is by taking that viewpoint, you're essentially denying that statement, right?
Well, it could be dangerous.
Yeah.
Because you're likening Allah to His creation.
But they'll say obviously that
They say bila kayfiyya.
No, but they say kama yaliqu bi shanihi, like according to
Bila
his
kayfiyya.
own, but his own reality. They won't say according to our reality. So
Yeah.
what would you say to that?
Yeah, but okay, so excellent. We can only understand the Quran in language, right?
Yeah.
Whatever tools Allah has given us is what we can understand. If you were to say, if they were to just rephrase what they just said, and just said, no, it's metaphorically in how you understand folk, but for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala this means something else that we don't know, but that's tafweed. That's tafweed al-ma'na. That's what the Maturidi said. Yani the awail, the earlier Maturidis, not the later ones. That's what they said. The Hanafis traditionally said this. They said, okay, the ma'na, we deny its literal meaning. Because the literal meaning, we can only know literally, which is by looking at the lexicon. And when you look at the lexicon, folk is its relativity between one thing to another thing. Yeah. So that was a problem. So they said what the Maturidis, what we would call madhab al-salaf, the actual salaf, the first early generations was, what this means, Allah knows best. Kayfiyah, we don't even accept the kayfiyah for Allah Azza wa Jal. But as for the meaning, we say, ufawwidu al-amr ila Allah. We assign this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not going to ask you and me about it on the Day of Judgment. It's not the actual meaning, it must be a metaphoric meaning, but we don't want to enter into that debate about what it is. Whereas the Ash'aris, because of a contextual reason, they did enter and they said, look, We're not saying it's like definitely this, but in the context, the most plausible ta'wil interpretation for this, like Allah's hand, is His power, because that's the context. Allah rising over the throne, it's His kingdom, it's His hukuma, right? They enter the people of ta'yin, yu'ayyin, whereas the Maturidi la yata'ayyan, la yu'ayyin. They don't specify any ta'wil for it. That was the difference. The later Maturidis kind of merged into the Asharis, into this kind of debate. Anyway, so the crux of the argument is this. These verses, if you were to take them literally, it causes problems. Because you can only understand that by looking at the dictionary. Or for example, nuzul, Allah descends. How do you understand that? If you're going to say you understand it literally, but without saying how, well, what does it literally mean to descend? It means to come from one place to another place. You can say as many words as you want, وَيَلِيقُ بِشَانِهِ, and it's like his shan. I can say like a king, he sits but not like a pauper. He sits according to his own majesty. But it's the same genus. Why? Because you're affirming the haqiqat of julus. Understand this. You're affirming the reality of sitting for the king and the reality of sitting for the poor man. Regardless of how it is, you affirm the reality. What is the reality of sitting?
So are they being literalist on the word? I understand, because when it comes to the meaning of that word, like you said, they said we don't know. But they accuse us of giving explanation, which is to read.
No, they don't accuse us of the explanation. They accuse us of denying the apparent meaning.
They have a problem from the get-go.
Yeah. They have a problem with denying the apparent meaning. But the answer that we give them is, how can you take the literal apparent meaning when it contradicts laysa kamithlihi shay? Because if you affirm a reality for being above, what is the reality of being above? I mean, you tell me, what is the literal meaning of above? Somebody give me an answer. But it's not like our above, but God has His own above. Above what? Above can only mean that you're above something. Is He, like, what is He above?
When you question,
And then sorry.
stay away from explaining.
No, they don't. This is where some of their books have even mentioned, and I'm happy to supply on demand. I'm not polemical, so I don't bring this in and I don't want to get involved in it. But some of their scholars have actually mentioned jism laysa ka'ajsamina.
Yeah.
It is a body. He is a body, but not like our bodies. شو معنى هذا?
But when you ask them about that, they
Yeah,
say,
but most
"No, we don't hold that."
most people don't know what they believe.
Yeah, they don't.
They don't know what they believe. Like most like quote unquote Asharis or Maturidi. Do you think they know what that means to be an Ashari Maturidi? People don't know what that means, and that's good. Alhamdulillah. Like that's fine, because the less you know about maybe the nooks and crannies, maybe better sometimes. But why we have to do stuff like this is because it's out there on YouTube. It's out there on a WhatsApp group, and someone's like, the guys at such and such mosque, they say X. Because of that, we're forced, just the way our predecessors were, to then do difa', to then defend what we
I
believe.
can never understand why we accuse each other, because if you look by the first statement, we all agree on it.
No, we don't.
The top one.
No, we don't. We say he has a hand, not like our hand,
No.
meaning he does not have a.
And you said the Shia, the Sufis.
No, we agree on the statement, not on what it means.
Statement, so I could never understand why.
No, but
we go into the
hear me out.
semantics and
No, it's not so here. We agree on the statement, not on the meaning. When we say Allah's hand is not like our hand, we mean in reality. His hand is not like our hand. He does not have a reality. Right? That means His power or something else that we don't know. Whereas they say Allah has a hand not like our hand, He actually has a hand, we just don't know how. That's a big difference.
The other thing that
We do not agree on that.
Imam Malik's statement.
Imam Malik has
Can you
3
explain
qawls.
that, please?
He has 3 qawls. If we get time, he has 3 qawls. The qawl that they base it on, the only one that supports their madhab is da'if with no sanad. The only 2 that are mentioned in the books of tabaqat do not support their madhab. I have it written down actually. If you want next time or after class, I can explain it to you. But I'm not gonna jump into that right now, because a lot of people won't even know who Imam Malik is.
Well, there's 2. So
I don't know if I finished my lesson yet. Yeah, have I finished my lesson? Yeah, go on.
Can we finish the lesson and then we'll.
Yeah, no, go for
it's
it. Yeah.
probably an idea that what's the ramifications of this then?
Yeah, just
So-
If they believe what they believe,
Yeah,
and
so
we say
now,
they believe what
I'm
they
not saying what the ramifications are. I'm saying what the potential problem is of tajseem.
Right.
The idea is that if you say now, so where did this lead to? This led to creeds that they held of Allah is in the sky. You ask any average Salafi, Where before, now it's come down, alhamdulillah, things, people have grown up, the whole community, different sects, everyone's grown up, people are not involved in this anymore, they don't care, and this is the way it should be. And we hope that it stays that way and it increases. Because we're not in a time that we need disunity. We really don't. Yet, there was a time, and I remember it, and I think a lot of people will remember it here, where if you met somebody, one of the first few questions they ask you is, where's Allah? Where's Allah? Because if you say in the sky, khalas, anta akhi. Now al-an, do you accept fulan shaykh or fulan? There was it was nasty period. Now imagine, where's Allah? Fis sama. What does that mean, fis sama? So okay, fis sama. So now, in the sky, so the Salafi belief is what? Correct me if I'm wrong. He is above the seven heavens. Above the, you seem like it. Above the seven heavens, there's the throne. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above the throne. Is that not what they say? So the arsh is jism. It's a creation of Allah. It's a jism. So if Allah is above it, how is He above it? We'll happily accept the above if you deny the real outward meaning and you accept the metaphoric meaning. Whether you choose to voice that or not, I don't. I personally, this is irrelevant for our discussion, but personally, for me, the safest position, the position that I genuinely live by, is the position of the early Maturidis, which is, I deny the apparent meaning, but as for what it means, Allah knows best. Yeah, Allah knows best what it means. But as for the Asharis that enter into it, khalas. So what I'm saying is, if what you mean by above, Sayyidi, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above in terms of His lordship, then khalas, there's no issue. But if what you mean is, He's above, we just don't know how, but He is actually above. What does He actually above mean? So they say He's in the sky, and they point, don't they? And they say that He is in the sky.
But there's like hadith, I don't know.
Of course it's hadith. No, but hadith does not, with all due respect, I have to say this. This is an important nukta.
I know because you go to the epistemic thing.
Absolutely.
I know, but what about if you do believe that Khabar Allah? I don't want to go there, but some
regardless, I'm telling you what the Asharis and Maturidis believe. They don't believe Khabar al-Ahad gives you qat'i. No, hold on. The strongest of Ahlul Hadith is Ibn Hajj al-Asqalani. Right. He does not mention that. He mentions that even a Sahih Hadith can only give you speculative knowledge. It can't give you creed, definitive knowledge. You can believe it, of course we all believe it, but you can't make a creed, meaning that you can't make takfir of someone over it. Yeah, you can't make doctrine out of it. You can use it to support doctrine. Now, elements of it can be used when it's used for detail. Then yes, in some of the schools they differ in how they use that now. Some of them will take the same ruling, like in the Shafi'i school, right? But what I'm saying here is no problem. Marhaba. Forget the ahadith. Let's just deal with the verse. You've got enough in the Quran. These verses exist in the Quran. What I'm saying is, the difference between us on this statement and them is we say Allah's hand is not like our hand actually. And they say no, Allah's hand is not like our hand, meaning that we don't know how His hand is, but He has an actual hand. That could lead to a type of tadseem, which in some Salafis, by tadseem I mean
anthropomorphism.
So a kind of likening Allah to His creation. So it's dangerous. So now look, if I was to stand here and I had a statue exactly like me, ma'adallah, and I got this brother to stand next to me, and I said to you, he's not like me and this statue is not like me. Which one is least like me? If you really wanted to say that one of these two is not like him, would you say it's the one that is the same as me in reality, in essence, in everything except our form? Or would you say the thing which is essentially like me, only that it looks like me? Which one is less like me?
I'll take the sledgehammer and take them both.
Now, I think this has been recording. You can technically use that because we've got that on camera. Yeah. Okay, so can I just finish this one nukta? Which one is less like me? The statue. He's far more like me. So if you have to choose, Allahu yad laka aydina, why would you deny this one to not get involved in tadseem, but keep the one that's more? You know, it's more. There's more likeness if there's reality than if it's kayfiyah. So for us, this was the crux of the argument. Now when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses these sorts of attributes of hand, of face, that we do not recognize that Allah has an actual face or hand, except that they mean something. Whether you choose to articulate it as an interpretation or not is entirely up to you, and both of those opinions are correct. If you do not articulate the interpretation, this is the Maturidi position. And if you do articulate it, based upon what the ulama have said, then you are. And even Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal made ta'wil. And I haven't done that. This is not going to go. If I ever did a separate lecture on this, which I don't think I would, because what would be the need for that? This is just because we're doing a course on it, so it's come up. I don't think I'd get into a polemical debate about the attributes of God. I really wouldn't. I don't think I would. But if, let's say, there was a group of students that were really interested and wanted to sit down, I could then start bringing you the aqwal of when the Salaf did ta'wil. What are you going to do with that? Now,
Or Sahaba even.
Sahaba, Abdullah ibn Abbas.
Yeah.
So, na'am, let me just see. Na'am, I think, there's actually a little bit more that I probably would have meant to mention, but it's 8:59. So I think on that, so let me just do one summary of what we did today, if that's okay. We looked at the sifa of takween in its relationship to qudra, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes being through takween, that the attribute of takween, not the qudra, as understood by the Ash'aris, but really it's not much of a debate. We looked at kalam, nafsi and lafzi, that the uncreated pre-eternal attribute of speech is a meaning with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only that it manifests in temporal letters and sounds, not that it has any sounds or letters. Lastly were these attributes al-mutashabihat, which are very important for us to understand, because if you start saying that God has a hand and He really has a hand and a face, then a hand and a face, in really what is it? The only way you can understand it is like our hand, and we can't say that. So whether you try to deny the howness of it or not, it still puts you into a conundrum that's very difficult to get out philosophically. And as for us, we do not even say that Allah has a how. Ta'ala, He's above this. And as for the apparent meaning, we do not accept it. We must accept the metaphoric meaning in order to protect this verse, which is unequivocal. Because if you accept that verse, you're challenging the unequivocal nature of this verse of Laysa kamithlihi shay. So we begin with Laysa kamithlihi shay, and then we work everything else around it. So there are many other arguments from the Salaf, like I said, that can be used. But hadha yakfi inshallah for, I think, this. If we ever do a second here, when I come back, inshallah, then maybe, we can do that, inshallah. Okay, barakallahu feekum, jazakumullahu khairan.